Welcome to episode 3 with Peter and Sri, the consumer journey and insights during COVID-19. And today we take on a fun topic that has to do with the digital shelf. Of course, needless to say, if you're going to be successful in CPG, you have to have great packaging. And these days, all browsing, searching for products has all turned to online on different retail platforms. And how consumers find your product is by looking at your product online, which is AKA the digital shelf. And today, Peter is here to, of course, give us details of what is the digital shelf, is it important for us, and how you can craft the perfect digital shelf. Our general advice to all of you post-COVID, e-commerce is definitely going to end up with a higher penetration than it ever has. You do need to think of the digital shelf as profound as packaging. So let's get this actually started. And my first question for Peter is actually a straightforward one. A lot of people, especially executives, are probably asking, Peter, what does it mean when we say the digital shelf? Like, what is it actually?
Sri, thanks, and good morning. It's always fun to get back together with you. I know we've talked about this. It's the favorite part of our week. And this topic in particular is something that's relevant to both of us. So let's start off. First and foremost, you kind of explain what the digital shelf is. That is typically the storefront where e-commerce in particular occurs on a retailer or even a brand site. Specifically, the product page is really the section of that site that is solely dedicated to a single product or a base product with variants. And variants are, for example, the size or the color of a product. This will typically be reflected in apparel categories and apparel retailers. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have a single product page for each and every color and size variant. That is much too much for a consumer to try and navigate. So creating a page where a consumer can configure the base product to the color and size that they want is much more efficient. I should also mention that in the industry, we typically refer to this page as, in its full term, as the product display page, or the PDP for short. And I should also note that there may or may not be e-commerce. In a retailer case, there certainly is, but in brands, particularly around categories that they can't ship products, so think perishables like dairy or frozen, in those particular cases, they are product display pages, they are part of the digital shelf, but they may not be doing e-commerce on them.
I experienced this in my recent employment. Of course, now I'm the co-founder of ZenFuel, a natural supplements brand, but in my past experience in the color cosmetics category, it couldn't be more profound, where we had close to 25 different shades.
Yeah.
A lipstick or an eyeshadow or a mascara. So yeah, pretty clear digital shelf. So it's a key word, folks. Pay attention. That immediately leaves me, Peter, to of course ask the question on decomposing the digital shelf. So what are like the different components of a digital shelf? And then what would you recommend as best practices for these different components? Like, how does one win?
Well, here's what I tell you. The digital shelf's product page is all about content. And the goal here is to provide the consumer with all the content necessary to accelerate the path to purchase. And necessary is critical. You may not want to provide them all the enormous amounts of content that are possible. You don't want to confuse them. You want to provide what your research tells you is what they need to know. So how do you structure the page? It's kind of a throwback to the old newspaper days, but typically when you talk to people in the industry, they refer to the product page and the sections of it as above the fold and below the fold. So what's above the fold? When you open a product page, what is displayed on your device is what we would refer to as above the fold. There's no configuration or scrolling necessary. It's what shows up. And that's why you also have to consider, of course, what type of device your consumers are typically using. Increasingly, mobile first is the strategy. People are using mobile devices to view it. And so you need to make sure what appears above the fold is mobile friendly. And so then the types of content that you're going to include above the fold are some critical elements. First and foremost, you better have an image of the product. If you don't have an image of the product, you are going to lose their attention. You need a good description of the product. That's pretty critical. Other things you're going to need, the unit of measure so that they understand what size, particularly if they don't have variants on the page. What's the total price they're paying absent shipping? Because of course they're going to have some shipping options at the end.
Sure.
You want to know, you'd like to have a snippet around UGC, user generated content. So at a minimum, the average star rating and the number of reviews, that builds enough trust. You probably also want badging, and badging is really referring to things like it's a top selling item, it's a top rated item, it's an item that's on sale. That's really what you need at the top of the page.
And these badges are all earned, correct?
Ideally, they're earned, yeah. The consumer, if they aren't earned, the consumer will understand that and discount the value. So if it's badged as featured or on sale, that's not necessarily an earned badge. It's one that it's a promotional badge. It's not necessarily about the quality or the sales rate of the product. And then you have to think about below the fold. That's kind of where everything else goes. So when you think about things like a more detailed product description, the directions on how to use it, if it's an ingestible product and there are any warnings you have to be concerned about, the specification, the size, these are all kinds of things that belong below the fold as well. The ingredients of the product. I would also say that health lifestyles, depending upon what type of retailer you are, lifestyle badging could appear above the fold. So if you're a natural food retailer, badging the fact that the product is gluten-free or non-GMO or fair trade may well belong above the fold. But if you don't have that kind of room and you're a more multi-department retailer, putting it below the fold is fine. But it's important to consumers, and you want to include that information as well.
So Peter, when you discuss these different components, I am tempted to focus on each of these components a little bit, but the one that comes to my mind as most profound, when brand marketers create innovation and they create packaging, they obsess over the packaging and the brand's value, mission, efficacy that's communicated on the packaging. In a digital environment, images, I'm guessing, are the best way for you to be able to communicate those. So what are the roles of product images? Like, where should they be placed, and how do they actually work its way to the website? And is it like the most important component?
Sure. So the image section above the fold is without question the single most important part of the product page. In the absence of a consumer actually being able to physically hold a product, kind of the way you described it, Sri, to read the back panel, understand the weight of the product, the relative size of the product, they can't do that in a digital world. And so this is where the image section at the top of the page becomes essential to the acceleration of the path to purchase. The Baymard Institute, which is typically considered to be the gold standard of market research around digital product pages and attitudinal studies, tells us that this is the first place that consumers go on a product page when they're not at all familiar with the product. They're going to go through there and they're looking first and foremost at the hero image. And ideally, the product page has an image carousel at the top so that you can get alternate images beyond just the hero. The hero shot is clearly going to be the front face of the product or a slightly angled version of the product, but it has to be a good representation of the product. Alternate images can be different angles. They can be showing the product in use. They can also be text and visual images like directions. Maybe it's the nutritional panel, but all of that is critically important. Our research shows that you need at least 3 to 5 images in this for it to be considered valuable to the consumer. Short of, if you just have a single image, that may not be enough for the consumer to make an educated purchase decision. So thinking about how you manage that content is critically important. I mean, Sri, you came from the cosmetic space, I'm sure you can talk about, in particular, the use of imagery for applying makeup on faces and things like that. So it makes a lot of sense. One great idea that where I work, and as everyone knows, if you've watched this podcast, I work for a customer feedback company, is taking some of that feedback and highlighting it in an image that appears in the carousel. Sure, you may have a ratings and review section, but a lot of retail sites don't. And so taking a verbatim, putting the 5-star rating, building it into an image and putting it in the image carousel is a great way to start injecting authenticity even into places where ratings and reviews don't exist. You're already spending money on collecting that yourself. Why not do something like that? What I will say this, I'm always amazed, particularly when I go through e-grocery retailers, how many products don't have images. They're typically direct store delivery or private label items. People will ignore that product if you don't have an image. So at a minimum, have a hero image. Now, there are some retailers that, due to probably legacy limitations, haven't moved to an image carousel yet. If you're a brand and you're faced with that kind of a retail situation, do your best to make the most of that single hero image. Maybe it's the hero image and it's got, if like in an example of beer, it's got the size of the pack associated with it. So you may want to include some other verbiage on the hero image, but it should be a fairly clean image with a couple of additional pieces of content associated with it.
I feel mostly CPG is largely, while I don't want to use the words ignored, I think that's the outcome of the actions. You know, the obsession over physical packaging hasn't yet moved over to the digital images. However, I think unfortunately this pandemic is going to force a lot of people to, and I see a welcome change in the CPG industry towards focusing on the digital stuff, and in particular the images. You know, you referred to cosmetics, and while working cosmetics, one of the areas we found consumers asking a lot of questions and wanting output from us was in the area of actually showing them how to use a product. Tutorials. Not all cosmetics and makeup are made the same. Applying mascara, while it may seem intuitive to some, there's an art to doing it the right way. There's an art to applying lipstick the right way. And there's an art to applying eyeliner the right way. So I found that consumers really wanted to and consumed a lot of video content. What's your thoughts around video content? Like, is it something that should automatically be included in the perfect product page for content? Like, what types of videos? I always felt that it was more tutorials on product usage. And then, of course, we have the wonderful ecosystem called YouTube. What's the connection back if you make videos on your product and brand equity back to YouTube?
Great question, Sri. So video is absolutely important in categories like cosmetics, but generally speaking, in anything that requires assembly or isn't intuitive, you may not need a video to show people how to pour a bowl of cereal, but in many categories, you do need that. Brands are going to have much more control over the quality and types of videos that they can present on their sites rather than retailer sites. Each retailer is developing their own rules and regulations. Generally speaking, they want video, but they want video to reside on their site. They don't want the ability of the consumer to click on a video that transports them to a site like YouTube, because it conflicts with the flow of the purchase system. If you take them off the site, their ability to get back to the site is severely restricted, and that disrupts the path to purchase. So making sure that the content is there, but that it's compliant with each retailer's requirement is critical. That's why most big brands use a content facilitator. Companies like Syndigo's Web Collage or Salsify, they're in charge of essentially managing all of the content library that brands have developed, understand all the retailers of where that content is looking to go to, and understanding how to make sure that when they deliver that content to the retailer, it is compliant with that retailer's requirements. That's a critical component for a brand to consider. For a brand to do that without a content provider can suck up a lot of time within their walls, and they may not always be updated on the most recent requirements from each retailer. So working with third-party facilitators is critical. I'll also say this, why you want visual imagery in particular is increasingly when it comes to content, either from the brand or even from user-generated content, retailers are starting to expect that of of brands rather, and they're scorecarding those brands. So as an example, Target has as many as 10 different content scorecards based upon the category, and they set requirements. Some of them are pass-fail, like do you or do you not have an image that was submitted by a consumer, and others have you need to have at least X number of images in the image carousel or a certain number of content pieces below the fold. So all of that is getting scorecarded, and I even know that they're starting to charge back suppliers who are not in compliance with the requirements that they've established for contribution. Retailers want their sites to be as comprehensive as possible for someone to make a purchase decision, and they can't generate that content about the brand themselves, so they have to rely on their brand partners to be able to deliver it.
Yeah, I think generally you and I would advocate very strongly, always try to flex up and use third-party services where available. You don't have to do it all.
Yep.
So Peter, I'm tempted to ask, as we discuss images and we discuss, how variations of images can be, a very important section that I think we need to cover after images are browsed and after videos are seen is the all-important buy box, or the buy section. I think of this as it's important not just to manufacturers that make product, retailers that actually transact the product to a consumer, but equally important for a consumer, because one of the biggest frustrations that they have in the transactional buying experience is it's not easy, sometimes takes too long, etc. So could you talk a little bit about the buy section of any product detail page, its importance, and what should those that actually sell product be focused on in the buy section, which I also love to call the buy box?
Yeah, Shri. So the buy section is essentially the part of the page which is the call to action for them to add the product to their cart. So it is really a critical component, and it should be fairly different and quite pronounced on the page. Yeah, you've built all this wonderful content, but if they don't know how to easily add that product to their cart, then you've kind of missed the point of why you've created the product page. So it should be a limited amount of information that is available to them in this section. You want to try and minimize it so that they really understand that other than probably the price and any discounts, this is where you just have that big pronounced button that says click and add this product to the basket. It is the final call to action. So don't try to confuse the consumer too much with information. If you over supply information in the UX, studies we've seen show that it will confuse consumers, and it will in effect discourage them from clicking and adding that product to their basket. The one thing you would want to make sure you have in there is if the item is out of stock or it's going to be delayed for delivery, make sure you clearly pronounce in this section that this product will be available on such and such date or will be shipped to arrive on such and such date. Because if you don't do that and the product is significantly out of stock, you may disappoint the consumer and they may actually not add it to their basket. So try to be as transparent as possible. Always recommend transparency.
So you just mentioned shipping and the importance of mentioning the shipping journey and the transparency around when they will receive the product. So when a retailer communicates this shipping philosophy and how the product will be shipped and when, etc., two things that come to my mind around the buy area especially is shipping, as well as in some cases gifting, especially as Mother's Day is around the corner. gifting definitely comes to mind. So what would be optimal around shipping for returns? Like, is that policy something they need to communicate right there? Is it a click? Like, what's going on there? And then how do you actually communicate and also leverage and work on gifting?
Yeah. So the studies I've seen said probably about 60% of all e-commerce sites have a real problem with this particular section, and it causes a lot of friction in the purchasing behavior. In the add to cart section, there are some critical components you need to have here. So as they've chosen the shipping option that they want, you need to be able to clearly display what the revised total cost of the product is, and the implication that that shipping product has, that shipping mechanism has done that. If you're an omni-channel retailer, this is also where you're probably showing the ability to pick this product up in store. And so if they don't want to ship and they want to pick it up in store, make sure that the availability of that product for the particular store that they're looking to collect it at is part of this component. If it's not available in their local store, make sure that they can find another store nearby where they can find that. So that's a critical component of what they need to do. And not only that, if you're going to ask them to pick it up in store, maybe sometimes they don't want to go to the counter and have it already picked for them. I can tell you this, when I go to a store like Home Depot, I want to know where in the store to go. I don't want to walk up and down 300 aisles in a 200,000 square foot warehouse. I want to know exactly the aisle and bay number of where it is. So if I'm going to pick it up in store, make sure that that information is there. But if you are delivering it, make sure in this particular section that you're outlining specifically the date that it will arrive. Not I want 2-day or I want 3-day shipping, because then you're forcing the consumer to actually make the calculation in their own head. Tell them, based upon the options they have, when the product is going to arrive. That will allow them to address the relative urgency of those items. If I'm going to a wedding and I need to have that particular tie at my house before I leave for the wedding, then that's how I'm thinking about it. So make sure you stress the date particularly. And then when we get to the gifting section, most of the studies I've seen said it's actually better to have the gifting on the main product page and not on the shipping page, because then they know why they're buying this product and they want to see the gifting options while they're purchasing.
Like a value add, right?
Yeah, exactly. So make sure it's part of the base product page and not on the shipping section. That's really what it should be for, exactly that. You shouldn't be making your gift options there.
Understood. So moving on to other sections of the perfect product page here in this episode. Of course, we talked product variations earlier. So I'm going to move to important thing you said right up front in question 1, which is what is a digital shelf? You talked about descriptions for products. I got to imagine the way a description for a product is written and what it communicates is a game changer for the brand and for the retailer in terms of a consumer being able to find it, which of course leads me to ask, is there a tie to SEO in general? And the second part is finding and then convincing the consumer that it is the right product for them. So what's the role of product descriptions, aka titles of products, and how does it fit into this ecosystem of the perfect product page?
So I'm going to go back to some more research, and I love referencing the Baymard Institute study because they were the best at this. They said that for all the people they observed and the thousands of people that participated in this work, eventually every consumer went back to the product description to deliver them some measure of suitability for the product. So how you describe the product and the completeness of that description and everything about it is critically important for any type of subsequent in-depth exploration. Yeah, you've got the header and the title of the product, but really getting into what the product is and what it does is very important. Make sure you use straightforward language as best as possible. Don't use grandiloquent words like I just did in describing it. You want people to understand what the product is. And ultimately an SEO friendly product description is going to describe the core features, the core benefits of the product, and the practical use of the product in the store. And the great thing about it is search engines are now more designed to return results that are about the value rather than the strict words that were entered into it. So the better that you can describe the value of the product, the better the SEO value will be in major search engines.
Peter, that's got to mean like AI and technology is actually caught up. They're reading these descriptions much better, because I still remember when I was fairly young in the e-commerce journey, we used to do a lot of what's known as keyword stuffing. Is that obsolete?
No, keywords definitely still a relevant term, particularly on retail sites. On major search engines, the AI is substantially more intuitive, and retailers are starting to invest in those capabilities. But I wouldn't just dispense with keyword search. It's not an either or, it's an and. Make sure you're doing both the keywords and you are being very descriptive of the product.
So let's digress now and move to the consumer. The all-important consumer is actually looking for the product found via the perfect product page. So in my own journey in the CPG industry, I've found most brands are hesitant to bring in user-generated content. What's your take on user-generated content in general, and should user-generated content, I'm really paraphrasing this and asking a very specific question. Should user-generated content make its way to a product, a PDP, a product detail page somewhere in the ecosystem? Because of course, there's user-generated content in social media, in ratings and reviews. Those are all largely user-generated content. But this is very specific to product detail pages. What's the role of user-generated content? It should be there.
Well, I told you earlier in our conversation that the Baymard Institute said the single most important part of the product page was the image carousel. A close second was the rating and review section. So I'd break it down in two ways. The above the fold is there is a modicum of information that you want to be able to provide that just instantaneously delivers some measure of trust and authenticity about the product. So at a minimum, a star rating and a review count. And that's what you're used to seeing at Amazon in particular. That's probably their big secret sauce, is the volume of content that they have. So being able to display that gets you off the ground, but then you need to be able to allow consumers to go a little bit deeper than that. So the double click down is, well, that's nice, but now I want to see things like the distribution of rating. So having what's called a histogram, which breaks down the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 distribution of stars, and then letting that act as a filter. I know I personally love to always go to click the number 1 and see how bad the reviews could actually be, and read those number 1 reviews, because that helps me understand whether those are legitimate or not legitimate reviews. If it's not being moderated correctly, and I think we talked about this in a previous episode, and people are complaining about the delivery service and not the actual product, then I discount the value of that review. It's really more about the buying experience than it is about the product itself. But I also am very concerned, back to the images, is while I like to see the images the brand shares with me, I also want to actually see how, say it's a jacket, how it fits on normal people or people that are my size. And so making sure you offer the ability for consumers to share that content and then you display it on that product page is going to, again, inject additional trust and authenticity. And then lastly, what I'd say is, so now you've got all these great reviews on your site. Actually ask your consumers that are reading the reviews whether that review was helpful or not. And then at the top of the page, highlight the most positive, the highest rated review, and the lowest rated review that were found to be most helpful. That's also going to help as a filter, get people to really understand how incredibly good this product is, or what are some legitimate concerns about this product. So that's pretty good. And then the last thing I'd say about it is, how you got to the product display page is critically important. You probably came to it through the product listing page. If you're not displaying the rating and review snippet on the product listing page, you're doing yourself a major disservice, because they may not actually click to look at the product display page and learn a lot more about that product.
So Peter, you just referred to the listing page. And my last question for today is a straightforward one. What is this listing page? And is it important? Is it for every single brand, every single PDP, every single category? Is there an area where this is specific? But just please decompose the listing page for us.
So the listing page, I'll say that in the space where I come from, groceries, it is, in my estimation, the most important part of the digital shelf. And the reason for that is 50 to 75% of all basket ads on e-grocery sites occur from the listing page rather than the product page. So what is the listing page? The listing page is what it sounds like. It is a list of products that appear when either you enter a search term or you drill down to a specific category. And you're used to seeing, you know, maybe it's 3, 4, or 5 items wide, and then it's down maybe 8 or 9 rows. And it could be 12 products, or you can default to change it to 24 or 32 or whatever it is. Each site has its different, but basically what it's doing is it's showing you a modicum of information. It's typically a hero image. It's a brief description of what the product is, the unit of measure, and badging, like is it on sale? Is it a top rated? Is it a top reviewed item? And then ideally the star rating and the number of reviews. Those are the critical components of the listing page. Now in groceries, a lot of people add that. In more high value items, consumers that people aren't buying very frequently, they're going to want to go to the product display page. But if your product doesn't have that content, then an image in particular, nobody's going to click on it and go to the product display page where you have a chance to sell them that product. So all of those are critical components of what you want. And if you want consumers to be inclined to add the product right from the listing page, all of those attributes that I mentioned are very important.
Well, thank you, Peter. I think this has been very insightful on what makes for an amazing product detail page, a PDP or a content page. So we talked about, of course, the buy section profound for the consumer, as well as the seller of record and the manufacturer. We talked about images, and even within that, the hero images. We talked about product descriptions. We talked about the profound importance of having actual shipping information right up on a product detail page, as well as gifting options, which tend to be quite common these days. So thank you, Peter, for your views on the overall product detail page. We will be back soon with another episode very shortly. Do follow us, and you can find us, how to follow us right here below. And we look forward to chatting more with you and bringing you more consumer specific insights on CPG and e-commerce in general. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you joining us. And we have fun doing this. We hope you learn a lot. And we'll be back very shortly with another episode.